I want to welcome everybody to today's webinar, our first webinar of 2022, 3 ways to share your faith more effectively this year. I especially want to welcome those, if this is your first time attending an EvanTell webinar. Very quickly, we are an evangelism ministry. It's all we do. We share the gospel and we train Christians how to share the gospel with confidence, clarity, and kindness. Been around for about 50 years. It'll be 50 years next year. And we have held over 800,000 evangelism trainings, and we have facilitated more than 40 million gospel presentations. And it's been an amazing ministry. It's been amazing to see what God has done through this ministry, and it's all because of support from those like you who just love the gospel and love to see it get shared. So thank you for attending. Today is a really special day, as hundreds of you have registered for this webinar because you're interested in knowing how to share your faith effectively in today's culture. As many of you do know, culture has shifted dramatically in the last few years, and we've seen several effects from that. People are more isolated than ever. People are less trusting than there ever have been before. When it comes to topics that are very personal to people, they feel they're less likely to share about them because they feel like they may be judged or labeled or canceled altogether by their peer group. And so the question becomes, how do we have conversations about the gospel in a culture like this? So before we get too far into today's content, I do want to make sure that we're not talking about changing the gospel. Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. But it's how we have conversations about the gospel that needs to change and adjust for today's culture. And there's really 3 priorities that we want to focus on today. Number 1 is the focus on being authentic when we're talking to others and having conversations. We're going to unpack what that looks like. And the practice of active listening, and that's a term that some of you may have heard before, and some principles aligned with that, but some very specific things in regards to evangelism that are very pertinent in today's culture that we want to talk about today. And then lastly, just proactive planning. When it comes to sharing your faith and wanting to do that effectively, we got to have a plan in place, or it's just not going to happen. And so we want to talk about how to do that and how to do that effectively. And so we only have 30 minutes and only 28 minutes left, so let's jump right in. What does it look like to have a mindset of authenticity when we're looking to have conversations about the gospel? And I think there's 4 things that really stand out that are relevant to having conversations in today's culture. And number 1 is, I have a sincere concern for this person. Sometimes when it comes to sharing the gospel, we can see it as just a transfer of information or a message that we're sharing. And it's so much more than that. We teach often in trainings that we hold that if somebody has a feeling or gets a sense that you're just looking to transfer a message to them, but they don't feel like you have a sincere concern for them, they're going to be able to sense that from a mile away, and they're going to disengage. So those in today's culture, they're looking for, do you really have a sincere concern for me? The reason why it's point number 1 on the first slide here is that it's really, really important. It's a prayer point for a lot of us of, am I seeking God and asking Him often, Lord, help me to have a concern for those that are in my sphere of influence, my neighbors, my coworkers, my friends. Do I have a genuine concern for their eternal destination? Because the gospel is so much more than just a transfer of information or memorizing a specific way of presenting the gospel. So we got to start with, God, help me to have a genuine concern for this person so that they can sense this authenticity about reaching out to them. Next, I want to have a genuine conversation, not execute an agenda. So again, sometimes we'll go out and we share the gospel because somebody told us that we should. Or maybe a pastor said, hey, you need to go share the gospel. And so we're like, okay, I will. Or maybe I attended a webinar from an evangelism ministry and I feel like, well, now I need to share the gospel. Or maybe I possibly just feel like I haven't shared the gospel in 3 or 4 years. And so I just feel like I want to do it. And it becomes kind of this agenda item of, I've found somebody that I feel like I want to share the gospel with, and I'm going to go have this conversation with them, and it's not going to end without me sharing the gospel. And that's really not how we want to approach having a conversation, especially having an authentic conversation with somebody. We want to have a genuine connection with them, a genuine conversation. The Lord may take it in a completely different direction than what you were intending. And if you're focused on just checking some boxes on an agenda and things start going sideways according to the agenda you have, you're going to get really frustrated or you get really disheartened. But if you go there saying, I really want to genuinely connect with this person, then things change dramatically. And that's a key part of authenticity. Next, I want them to hear me, not just my message. And this really brings your testimony into this, especially in today's culture. People care about your experience, what it is that Jesus means to you. And this kind of goes back to that transfer of information. I'm not just looking to run down a message or run through a tract or tell somebody about the Jesus that I've heard about. I want to make sure that they hear from me, the Jesus that I know, the Jesus that transformed my life, that pulled me from darkness into light, saved my soul. And so if we get so focused on just a method or so focused on a rote explanation of the gospel, we can really miss the importance of sharing with somebody, hey, I'm not just telling you about somebody that I know or somebody that I heard about. I'm talking to you about the God who changed everything for me. And that's really about transparency, which is a key element of authenticity, to show people, I want you to see what Jesus did for me, and allow that to come through in my conversation with you. And then lastly here is, I'm more interested in this person than I am in my goal. We always have a goal of seeing somebody trust in Christ. That's my goal. But in a culture where people feel devalued, in a culture that we have where a lot of times people feel like they're purposeless, we want to make sure that they feel like they are valued. They are created in the image of God, and they have value because of that. And if we have interest in them because of that, and they feel that from us, they're going to be much more interested in having continual conversations with us that may lead, should the Lord allow, to the gospel. So if I'm just focused on my goal of, I got to get to the gospel, I end up missing very important things that they may want me to hear, like church hurt that they've experienced, maybe an abusive relationship that they've been in the past, some really tough trials that they've gone through. I end up missing that because I'm so focused on the goal that I forgot to be really invested and interested in this person. These four things really highlight and define what it means to be authentic when we're reaching out to others, and to let other people see that we have an authentic desire to connect with them, not just a desire to get some information to them and then move on. I don't think anybody's knocking the ball out of the park in all four of these areas. So regardless of who you are, I think one of these four is an area where you can jot down and say, here's something that I really need to pray about. So kind of the key takeaway here is authenticity is all about sincerity and openness. It lets people know that you don't have an agenda or a preset goal. You simply have a deep concern for them and their need for Jesus. So that's kind of our first area right there, is a mindset of authenticity. Next, we want to think of the practice of active listening. And as I mentioned before, people have probably heard this term before. Maybe you've been to Toastmasters, or maybe you've been to a public speaking class where they talk about the importance of active listening. These principles are critical for evangelism today as well. And let me go through these, and I think you'll see why. So first of all, having a mindset or a practice of active listening includes my body, my eyes, my expression. They all say, I want to listen. People feel ignored often today. I mean, we live in a culture where to be at peace with your neighbor is to keep your head down and mind your own business and disengage. The exact opposite of what Jesus tells us to do. And we want people that when we engage with them, say, we're not like that. When we talk to you, I'm squaring my shoulders with you so you can know I'm fully engaged with you. If you're comfortable with it, my eyes are locked in on yours. And just kind of a side note, not everybody is comfortable with that. Some people are mystified when two guys are talking shoulder to shoulder and looking at completely different things, but having a very meaningful conversation. But however that, whatever that means to you, that I'm locked in with my eyes, I'm locked in the way that connects with you. And my expression is very neutral and it's open and it invites you to say more. When you say something that's kind of shocking or may even be offensive to me, I'm not going to react with my face in a way that's like, oh my goodness, I can't believe you said that. I'm going to show you an expression that says, I want you to say more. I was talking to a wonderful lady that I work with a couple days ago at work, and she was explaining to me how one of the things that really frustrated her recently at church is when she went to go shake hands with somebody in the foyer whose job it was to greet people, and he stuck his hand out to shake hers and said, "Hey, how are you doing today?" And as she shook his hand, she looked up at him, and his eyes were already moved to the next person that he was wanting to go greet. And she felt like uh, he didn't really want to hear how I was doing. He was just asking a rhetorical question and then moving on to the next person. Now, I'm absolutely certain that wasn't intentional, but it's how we can come across sometimes when we're engaging people with the gospel. We don't give them our full attention. We kind of treat it as I'm here to do this thing and then move on. And we don't ever want to come across this way, especially at a time like this when people feel unseen and ignored in the culture that we're in. Next, we want to something that really identifies active listening is I'm listening to understand, not just to respond. These are two very different things. I'm listening to respond. It just means that I'm speaking, I'm stopping so you can speak because that's polite, and then I'm going to pick right back up where I was and talk again. That's listening to respond. We don't want to do that. We want to listen to understand. So when we're really locked in and somebody can see through our body language and the way that we're expressing ourselves, we're locked into what we're saying. We're listening to everything we're saying and everything they're saying and listening to what are those key points that I need to understand about what it is they're saying about their background, their experience, maybe their family, maybe their work life right now. What can I take from what they're saying and kind of pull that out and maybe ask a question about that? And that's really the next point that's really key in active listening and really key in conversations today, because people really enjoy two things. They enjoy the sound of their own voice and they love talking about themselves. And so when you're listening to understand and people are saying several things, they start giving you a little bit of personal information about family, background, work, whatever it may be, and you grab those things out of the conversation. When it's your turn to speak again, you have this great opportunity to ask questions to start taking the conversation to a deeper level in that area. And there's three ideas. There's several questions you can ask, but here's three kind of core questions that you can ask to help take a conversation to a deeper level. One is, would you mind sharing more about that? When someone's talking about, you guys get on the topic of church or something like that, and you're sharing where you go to church, and they just happen to mention, I've been to a couple churches, but I've never really landed in one in particular, and then they continue on. But you're listening to understand, and so you grab that thing that they said about church, you kind of stick that in your pocket. So when it's time for you to talk again, you're able to ask that question of, hey, you mentioned how you've been visiting a lot of churches, but never really landed in one. Would you mind sharing some more about that? I'd love to hear more about your experience and why it is that you haven't really found a home yet. And that just starts taking the conversation to a spiritual level, to whether it's church wasn't for them, or whether they just haven't really found a church or not interested. But it allows you to start moving that conversation to a deeper level. Another one is rephrasing something that they've said in a different way, and then asking if you've understood it correctly. So someone may say, as you're talking about background and you're sharing things about how you were raised, and they say, we weren't really raised in a religious family, and they continue to talk about their background and past a little bit. But again, because you're listening to understand, you've picked up on that comment, and you say, hey, what I heard you say is your family didn't really talk about God that much. Is that correct? And so notice that you're not repeating exactly what they said, you're rephrasing it, making a little bit of an assumption, but then you're asking them, is that right? Because that can be so helpful in a conversation. And in that particular instance, you may find out that what they meant when they said they weren't really raised in a religious family, they may say something like, oh no, we talked about God all the time. we just didn't really talk about any specific religion. We didn't go to any specific church or weren't taught any specific religion at all. And now you know where to start taking that conversation. They have a belief in God. They just don't necessarily believe in the God of Christianity. So you're able to start moving that conversation in that direction. And this next question here is a great way to do that. It's my favorite question in this list because it highlights what we like to call permission-based evangelism. And it's when you ask, in this instance, when someone tells you that information that, yeah, we did talk about God, you say, oh, but maybe they talked about God, but they didn't prescribe to any one religion. And because nobody really knows who God is, you're able to say at that point, well, I do know who God is. Would you mind if I shared with you who I think God is and what he's done for us? And if that person says yes, it's such a welcome relief to you in that conversation because you have permission to move forward and share what you know is true about Jesus Christ and what he's done for you and what he can do for them if they choose to place their faith and trust in him. I love this question for today, especially at a time when topics around religion can be very offensive to people and very sticky. What a great opportunity to ask a question when things start moving maybe toward a religious topic or a religion in general. You're able to kind of stop and say, hey, I know this can be kind of a sticky subject, and I know religion can be a little bit controversial, but I'd love to share with you who I think God is and what he's done for us. Would you mind if I did that? And again, you have that person's permission to move forward, and it takes all the pressure. You don't have to worry anymore, like, how are they going to react? You've already had that permission to move forward. It's welcoming to the other person, a breath of fresh air that you sought the permission, and it's welcoming to you because now you feel the freedom to move forward. So these are really good questions just to kind of think about. They're really good to practice with others, and we'll talk about that in just a second. But the last thing here is to listen for a pivot point to spiritual matters. So usually that happens through asking questions. As you start asking these clarifying questions, finding out, hey, what do you mean by that? Or would you mind sharing some more? I think what I heard you say is that correct? Or doing this permission-based evangelism, you're automatically moving the conversation toward deeper and more personal things. And as you do that, you're automatically going to start moving to things that have the most meaning, which is just an open door for spiritual matters, and open the door to talking about how God has moved in your life. As you start moving to personal things about raising children or being married or going through trials, you're able to start talking about how God has helped you in that area, or how God has led you through this certain trial, or God has been a blessing to you in your marriage. So when you listen for those pivot points, you're able to make just this natural rotation. And again, this is really critical in today's culture. When people feel ignored, they feel isolated. Recent research has showed people feel lonelier than ever before because people are just focused on other things and not each other. And this gives you the chance, these 4 principles here give you the chance to show we're not like that. I'm here to engage with you as we talk about that first authenticity thing because I care about who you are, and I want you to know I'm locked in to what you're saying. So active listening sends all the right signals that you are engaged and you want to hear what they think. You're not just giving them time. It's really important. You're not just listening to listen. You're locked in to what they're saying. So this is definitely one of those sections to watch a couple times, to look through those questions, write down some of your own, and maybe even practice with a family member or a friend to get comfortable with them. The last one here is the process of proactive planning. I think we've all probably heard this expression: you fail to plan, you plan to fail. Well, the reason why it's endured so long is because it's true. And it's true in evangelism as well. If I don't make a plan for sharing my faith this year, if I don't actually intentionally sit down and think about how am I going to do this, we've just seen again and again and again over 50 years as a ministry, it just doesn't happen. If you don't plan it out, it fizzles out over a couple months, and then sometime around November, you start thinking, well, hey, maybe EvanTell will host another webinar on how to share my faith effectively in 2023, and I'll check that out. Don't do that. Make a plan this year. We'll talk, here's some questions to kind of think through. Number one, is where am I missing opportunities to simply start a conversation? This is just kind of doing an analysis of what neighbors are you not talking with at all? And let me preface this with a really important point that I think a lot of people miss. A lot of people can think of evangelism as I'm not sharing the gospel, and now suddenly I'm taking somebody through the Romans road, and that's evangelism. That's a huge leap from point A to point B, and that is not how evangelism works. You don't walk into a grocery store and find somebody with an apple and touch them on the shoulder and say, hey, that's a nice apple. Did you know Jesus Christ died for our sins and was raised again on the third day? That's not how conversations happen. Evangelism happens when we start conversations and we start moving the ball toward Jesus. And sometimes it takes 2 or 3 minutes, and all of a sudden the Lord opens the opportunity and you're able to present the gospel. Sometimes that can take a few days, weeks, months. As many parents can tell you with children that they've labored praying over for years, sometimes it can take years. But the first starting point is, where am I missing opportunities to simply start a conversation? Where am I missing opportunities to talk to my neighbors? Where am I missing opportunities to engage with my coworkers? What coworker do I know their first name of that I've worked with for 10 years and I don't know anything else about them? Because when I think about evangelism, I think my job is to go, how fast can I get to the Romans road with them? Instead of, how can I get to know them? How can I show that I have an authentic interest in who they are? How can I just engage with them in a conversation to show that I want to get to know them a little bit and just see what God does with that and where he takes it? What an amazing adventure that turns evangelism into, and instead of something terrifying that people often think of. So the first part is where am I missing opportunities? The second part here, the question to ask is, how can reaching others be incorporated into my weekly routine? So this is really that planning part. People don't really use paper calendars anymore to plan things out, but you certainly have an idea of what your regular routine is. And so your first step is you're thinking through, where am I missing opportunities to have conversations? And then where in my weekly routine can I start engaging in those conversations? You know, it could be a store clerk at a grocery store you go to, something like that, and you're missing an opportunity to really connect with them because you go at a time where it's really busy and there's always a bunch of people in line and you can't have a conversation with them without interfering with their job. But you've known over time that they work until usually a certain hour, and if you went a little bit later, they would have more time. You're missing an opportunity to have a conversation with them, and you can adjust your routine a little bit to go at this later time to connect with them. The same thing can be true with your neighbor or with your coworker. Like, where am I missing opportunities that are available to me to connect with this person? And how can I adjust my routine to take advantage of those opportunities? And the last one here is, who can I partner with for support, accountability, and community? And you know, I think I mentioned that the first point on the first slide was the most important point, but I've changed my mind. This is the most important point of the entire presentation, and here's why. When we think about Christianity, we think about church, a group of people who get together to worship together. We think about small groups, getting together in smaller groups and learning and growing together. We think about ministries, where we get together in groups and we do ministry together. But somehow, when it comes to evangelism, all of a sudden it's me against the world, and I have to do it all on my own. Somebody very cleverly told me not too long ago, evangelism is going somewhere you don't want to go, to do something you don't want to do, and say something I don't want to say. And it pretty much encapsulates a lot of what people think about evangelism today. But number one, it doesn't have to be that way. And number two, when I hear people say that, or I heard him say that, it was just, gosh, the word I was used in every single time. It's going where I want to go, or I don't want to go, and it's doing something I don't want to do, and it's saying something I don't want to say. And it doesn't have to be that way. You have a support group at church, people that you can contact and say, I just went to this webinar today, and I'm really serious about being more intentional about sharing my faith this year. Will you be in prayer for me? Will you help me stay accountable? Will you be in community with me? And here's the big one. Will you come out and do this with me? Would you be willing? I have a desire to go reach my neighbor and I'm gonna go make them some banana bread and just take it to them. And I'm gonna do it just to say, I've been across the street with you for years, and I just feel like I've never even gotten to know you. And I'm just gonna start a conversation, but I'd love to have somebody else by my side. That person isn't going to be offended or put off by the fact that you have somebody with you who's a friend. And it doesn't take a lot of deep digging into the New Testament to find out this is how reaching others has been done for quite a while. The apostles are generally often together, and when they're reaching others, Jesus is sending them out together. Go out together. This doesn't have to be a solo enterprise. I'm going to get off that soapbox because we're going to run out of time. But it is so essential that we understand evangelism is not me going out and doing something. There's no reason for you to get for you not to get together with other people. The last thing I'll say about this is there are many different types of evangelists. There's confrontational evangelists that love to knock on doors and hand out tracts. There's conversational evangelists that love to share the gospel in the midst of a conversation. There's invitational evangelists that love to invite people to church services or maybe even into their home, and where the gospel naturally is expanded upon. Nothing is more beautiful than when two different types of evangelists get together. And the more that you reach out to others in your church and ministries, the more you're likely to find a couple other people. And when you get a confrontational evangelist with a conversational evangelist working together, and beautiful things happen, and the demonic realm trembles. So last thing I'll say about that. My level of planning is a strong indicator of my commitment level. That's true for just about everything. And so I'll leave that right there. So where do I start? Some key elements to success. We'll run through these really quickly. Let me go back there. So number one, get in community. Talked about that. Manage your time. We can't make time. There's only 24 hours in a day, and they're all already allocated. You know that because for the past several weeks you've allocated them to where they're going to be allocated. So you can't make time, but what you can do is take time from something that maybe you're not using your time as wisely in. Maybe streaming a lot of series and movies, or maybe spending a lot more time than maybe you should on apps and your phone. Where can I take time to create maybe an hour's worth of time on a Tuesday evening between 6 and 7 where I can just plan, make a little plan and ask some of those questions? Where am I missing opportunities? Who can I reach in my daily routine to just start a conversation and just start to use some of the tactics that we just talked about to start moving this towards spiritual things? Keep a journal. Every time someone keeps a journal about evangelism, they always say the same thing. This is the most amazing thing I've ever done. It's helped me so much in my journey with God, and it's helped me to be accountable. It's helped me to seek answered prayers. Everyone who doesn't keep a journal always around November says, "Oh, I wish I would have kept a journal. I'm going to try again next year." So don't wait for November to come around where you say that. When this webinar ends, go find an empty notebook somewhere in your house, or go to Walmart and grab one and make your first entry. I attended a webinar today on January 26th, and I am committed to seriously sharing my faith this year. Underline that. There's your first journal entry. Prioritize prayer. We want to pray before, after, during conversations. We want to pray for boldness, for opportunities, for us to be sensitive to the Holy Spirit. Be constantly in prayer and ask others to pray for you. Last thing we're going to mention today is, I know we're running short on time. What we talk about today is a very short, very small part of a much larger presentation that we do live in churches. We have speakers that come out and do this. I'm one of those speakers. Evangelism trainers that come out. It's called Wherever You Go. There's a QR code right there. There's a website right there, evantell.org/wherever you go. You can find out more about it. If you're a pastor, we'd love to come host this at your church. If you're just a member of a church, feel free to go to this webpage. You can download part of the workbook. It's an amazing workbook. We get amazing testimonials from this all the time. I feel like I can share my faith better than ever. I've been to lots of evangelism trainings before, but nothing like this. Great experiences that people have had. We'd love for you to have that too. So check that out if you're interested. And I want to let you know, as we hit 12:30 here, we do a webinar on the last Wednesday of every month. We do send emails out. If you register for this webinar, then you will get email invites to these next webinars. The next one in February is deconstruction and how to address it. If you don't know what deconstruction is and you've never heard of it, you will hear about it in the next several months because it's surfacing. It's not a good thing, but we definitely need to know how to address it in the context of evangelism. And in March, evangelism and spiritual warfare. Who is my enemy? How does he attack? How do I defend? Especially in relation to evangelism. That's a really, really important one. That topic is always well attended, and so be looking forward to that. And we always invite you to come to EvanTell.org, blogs, videos, online training. We have all sorts of resources to help you share your faith, to just get more confidence, to share the gospel with more clarity, and to do it with kindness. You know, Peter tells us to defend ourselves with gentleness and respect when we're engaging with others, and we want to show you how to do that. So check out EvanTell.org. And very last thing, we weren't able to get to Q&A today, but if you have a question about anything we talked about today, email me directly at banderson@evantell.org, and I will get back to you within the next 24 hours. I'd be more than happy to answer your questions, any questions that you have regarding today's content. I wish we had more time, but it was a lot of substance today, and so we weren't able to get to Q&A today. Yeah, please feel free to use that email address, and I'd be happy to reach out to you. Thank you for joining us today. I hope this 30 minutes has been helpful for you, edifying to you. I hope it's helped you think of new ways to share your faith, to move toward gospel conversations. Please check out the recording and just kind of think through some of these things. And I just, God bless you all, and I hope you all have a wonderful rest of the week.